It is time to talk waivers for week number 8 in fantasy football, with waivers running tonight or tomorrow. It's time to get them set, and it's a kind of an interesting waiver wire for this week with no definitive top ad for this week, but plenty to discuss, plenty of situations to dissect. We'll do that right now. It is the waiver wire Q&A. That's right here on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter channels. My name is Jim Sannes. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberfire.com, joined here as always by JJ Zachariason. He is the editor-in-chief of Number Fire and FanDuel. JJ, you survived the Week 7 bye slate. How are you doing heading into week number 8?
I'm doing better than Aaron Rodgers because I just saw that Alan Lazard is also been placed on the COVID-19 list. So we'll see what goes on, with that game in general. It sounds like there's somewhat of an outbreak going on. But Lazard and Davante Adams both out, which would mean that we're going to see, Marquez Valdes-Scantling already injured. I think is he eligible this week or next week? But I don't think
he's eligible now.
Yeah, but I don't think he's playing yet.
He didn't practice at all last week. He has not been activated yet. And he would have been activated likely yesterday if you're going to practice. I don't think.
Right, exactly. And the Thursday game makes it even more difficult. So you're looking at Amari Rodgers and Randall Cobb running the show for the Packers in that huge game. So it's a tough scene there.
Can we get Big Shot Bob Tunyon's yardage prop up to like 11.5 now? Like, are we getting too ambitious here?
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know how you can, I know this is not a start sit show, but I don't know how you can even confidently play Aaron Rodgers right now. With that situation in Arizona's been one of the best adjusted fantasy points allowed teams against quarterbacks this year. It's just a really, really tough situation. Aaron Jones might see a 30% target share in that game.
So 30% for Aaron Jones, 30% for Cobb, 30% for Amari Rodgers, and 10% for Robert Tonyan still, because he's not allowed to get more than that. We are, as always, taking your questions no matter where you're watching: YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter. Put those questions in. Also, a quick reminder, we are live on air each and every weekday at 4 p.m. Talking NFL Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Tom Vecchio talks NBA DFS every Wednesday. So hit subscribe. Make sure you come back here daily at 4 p.m. Let's start the questions off with Tanantha over on YouTube. In a 1.5x scoring defense league, woof, Tanantha, would you play the Cardinals versus Green Bay without Davante, or would you rather go with streamers for this week?
Yeah, I still think this is a really good week for defensive streamers. First off, there's some really, really good options. I think the top option in general, like the best defensive play in general, is Cincinnati going up against the Jets. You get either Mike White, maybe they're playing Joe Flacco. Is Mike White? It's just like it's like they just threw in a create a character from Madden under center for the Jets.
Madden's more creative than that.
True.
Like Michael Bellman would be the quarterback for the Jets if this were a Madden. So it's actually a step below the Madden creative player somehow.
Yeah, exactly. So, a team like Cincinnati, I think that you can play. There's some other decent options this week. Seattle's still a decent option going up against Jacksonville. I'm pulling up a list. There's the Chargers are still out there in a lot of leagues against New England. They're still only rostered in, I think, like 17% of Yahoo leagues. So, because they were on a bye this past week. So, them against New England's a really good play, and I think Philadelphia against Detroit's a good play. So, you have 4 really good, waiver wire ads that you can stream. Aaron Rodgers still doesn't turn the ball over a whole lot and doesn't take a ton of sacks. So it's just not, it's not necessarily, of course, this is a huge downgrade for the offense. And I already mentioned Alan Lazard too. Of course, Arizona could end up, Green Bay could end up only scoring 13 or 17 points or something in this game. But I still don't really want to stream against Aaron Rodgers because he's not prone to the turnover.
And even last year when Davante was out, they had a game where I think everyone was hurt. Like literally everyone was hurt. It was against the Raiders, and Rodgers dropped like 4 touchdowns in that game. So like he can still play well without Davante, without Lazard. Obviously the expectations go down, but he's still Aaron Rodgers. And they also might be giving David Bakhtiari back. I think he practiced last week, so maybe back. But either way, I think I'd agree. I'm avoiding the Packers from a streaming perspective still. You mentioned good defensive streamers. Sounds like Luke has good quarterback streamers this week. Kirk Cousins, Daniel Jones, Teddy Bridgewater, Carson Wentz. Cousins is in the best game on the entire week. Daniel Jones in a pretty good one against the Chiefs. Carson Wentz probably in the second or third or best game on the slate against the Titans. Pretty good options here, JJ. Where are you leaning?
Yeah, look, it's a pretty good quarterback streaming week too. You have those 3 quarterbacks, and there's one more I can't think off the top of my head. I'm going to look at my list again really quick. Oh, never mind. It's not really one more. It's a deeper play. It's Geno against Jacksonville. So I don't want to throw Geno in there. Yeah. So I mean, like Daniel Jones against Kansas City, I think that he's the best traditional streamer this week because we could see a lot of scrambling. But Teddy's a good play against Washington. They've been the best secondary to target in terms of adjusted fantasy points. A lot of the quarterbacks. Carson Wentz in a pretty good spot against Tennessee in what could be a fairly high scoring game. But I think Kirk Cousins is in his own tier out of this group. You already mentioned that they have that game is the highest that you're going to find this week. And Dallas's defense has been good this season, but I think that you got to look at this game environment and just say, I want a piece of that. And Cousins has been strong this year. There is going to be some regression that hits that offense eventually because they're scoring so many touchdowns through the air versus on the ground. But I don't really care about that if your team's going to score 4 or 5 touchdowns potentially. If there is a shootout that happens here. So I think Cousins is the safest.
Numbers that projectile passing or like overall offensive efficiency for each game. And if you combine the efficiency between Dallas and Minnesota, it's the best game on the slate. So like you want Kirk Cousins in that game for sure if you can get him. That game, I wish it were on the main DFS slate too. Isaac is saying, hi JJ, any streamers you prefer to Rodgers with Adams out this week? Maybe Daniel Dimes against, I called him Daniel Dimes, which is weird, against Kansas City.
Daniel Dimes.
Danny Jones and Daniel Dimes. We'll switch the 2 over there. So Rodgers with no Lazard and no Davante, or Daniel Jones against Kansas City.
Man, I honestly think it's a toss up. That's really, really tough. With these the COVID situation with Green Bay, I think I'd probably still go Rodgers. Let's see how the line moves a little bit and see what that just generally looks like. I doubt it's going to move that dramatically with like an Allen Lazard or something like that. But I'm not like super I'm not going to be super aggressive in liking Rodgers because I don't think you necessarily have to. And then, like I said, Arizona's been a top 3 team in adjusted fantasy points a lot to the quarterback position. It's just that you're risking. I mean, Daniel Jones is not some locked in, very, very good starter. If you were talking Kirk Cousins or Aaron Rodgers here, I would play Kirk Cousins over Aaron Rodgers. But with someone like Daniel Dimes, I can't. No, I'm doing it too. Someone like Daniel Jones, there's enough ambiguity and iffiness around him and his pass catchers too. Let's not forget that. I mean, we don't know who's going to be playing for them this week. Is Sterling Shepard going to be back? Is Kenny Golladay going to be back? Is Kadarius Toney going to be back? Probably not for Toney, it sounds like, but what's that going to look like as well? So I think there's enough ambiguity there that I'd still go with Aaron Rodgers.
And the Chiefs defense has played better the past 2 weeks. I know they got shredded in the first half against Tennessee, but like that Washington game, they played well since they benched Sorensen, and Chris Jones came back last week and they looked better in the second half specifically. So I think against a shakier quarterback, that would be enough where I'd go Rodgers as well. So talk to Joe, are Mike Davis and Mecole Hardman drops? I mean, Mike Davis is kind of losing all the valuable work in that backfield, kind of banged up now too. I'm not sure if he'll be good to go. It sounds like he's probably fine based on what I've heard so far, but Hardman's still getting volume, but the offense not as valuable as it was before. So what do you think about these 2 guys?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the league size and who you'd be adding for them. Mike Davis is someone who I'd probably prefer over Hardman, and I only say that because it's a running back versus a wide receiver, and it's a little bit more scarce, and it's tough to find running backs who are just getting any volume in general. But yeah, I mean, this past week was not a good thing at all for Mike Davis. I mean, this was kind of the fear entering the season was that, you're really buying into Davis because of lack of competition, not because of Davis himself. Right. And I think it's a good lesson for everyone who bought into Davis. I mean, look, I made plenty of mistakes this year, so I'm not trying to like victory lap this. But, I think it's just a good lesson in general that even though the running back position is a volume-driven one, that coaches need to just throw them on the field and they can be relevant in fantasy. A guy like Davis didn't necessarily have the pedigree and the resume, to give us automatic great numbers. People were just drafting him based on the lack of alternatives in that offense. And then Cordell Patterson stepped up and he's been really, really good. So is he a drop? Probably not in like a 12-team league, maybe in a 10-team league. I can understand it. Just depends on the scenario here.
Especially because like, I think you can get a false sense of security in dropping Davis this week because the buys are lighter. There will be heavier bye weeks down the road. And you might need him then. I think I would keep that in mind.
The other thing to keep in mind too is that we're, of course, this has trended in Cordero Patterson's favor throughout the season, but it really trended in Patterson's favor this past week, like more than other weeks. Part of that might have been the injury towards the end of the game for Mike Davis. Part of it's just because maybe they just like Cordero Patterson more. I mean, they clearly like Patterson more. But at the same time, don't let 1 week totally transform your belief on that player or your belief in that situation. I'm not saying like go buy Mike Davis. I'm saying I don't like Mike Davis at all. But at the same time, don't overreact to what you saw in 1 week.
And he's still a running back getting volume. He played 60% of the snaps last week. Like he was still out there before he got hurt. Right. So, that's worth something at least. Let's talk to John on YouTube. Should T.Y. Hilton be added or are his constant injuries now at the trouble? Hilton is not on IR, but did not play this past week. They didn't sound super optimistic ever that he'd play last week. But I mean, with Paris Campbell out, if he's healthy, I feel like Hilton will get volume. So how are you viewing those two sides of T.Y. Hilton?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on what kind of league you're in and who you would be adding for him, et cetera, et cetera. Do I think that he's going to be anything better than like a wide receiver 4 in fantasy? Probably not. But I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that, you can still utilize those kinds of players throughout a bye week as long as he's healthy, of course. So just depends on your league size. I'm not like actively trying to get T.Y. Hilton on my rosters. I'm obsessed with Michael Pittman. I think he's very, very good. And I would continue to try to get Michael Pittman on my rosters, but T.Y. Hilton's not someone that I'm like overly excited about.
Michael Pittman just mossing dudes every single week and
he's
making
awesome.
It just ridiculously fun. Josh, is Daniel Jones worth an ad for the rest of the way with the receivers once they get healthy? Shepard's injury didn't sound good based on the warmups on Sunday, so that's kind of tough there. But Galladay didn't seem like it'd be like a long-term thing for him, and Kadarius Toney potentially not long-term either. So, given the Giants may get healthier, does that make Daniel Jones an interest for you? Adding him this week with eyes towards the future here, or no?
I mean, yeah, I think that there's at least some intrigue, right? I mean, we've seen him give us spiked weeks this year because of what he can do with his legs. He's rushed for 27 or more yards in 5 of 7 games played this year. So he's giving you basically an extra like 3/4 of a touchdown in terms of fantasy scoring each week with his legs. And, then you add on all these weapons. And the thing with Sterling Shepard too, let's say that Sterling Shepard's the odd man out for a little while because of some lingering injury that he has. That's not necessarily like a death sentence for Daniel Jones because they can then throw Kadarius Toney in the slot, which is where they probably feel most comfortable with him. And then you get Darius Slayton stretching the field on the one side and then Kenny Golladay playing the X, which is what Kenny Golladay does. So if 3 of those 4 are healthy, I feel fine. And then obviously Saquon Barkley coming back eventually. So yeah, I mean, like if you really need a guy more long-term and you're looking to stream this week, then Daniel Jones should just be the automatic guy. Whereas I think you can at least make an argument for like Carson Wentz or something like that this week next to Daniel Jones as like a decent enough streamer. But if you want to use that as a tiebreaker, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And he has the rushing too, which does help for sure. So Philip's asking about who to add on waivers this week between Will Fuller and Samaje Perine. We don't do start sits, so I'll take this as an ad drop question. Will Fuller was in 15 transactions for today. Not coming off IR this week, but it does sound like he has a chance to come off week 9. He's eligible to come off now, but it sounds like they're going to hold off on him for now. Samaje Perine had like a 41-yard touchdown last week, but only had, I think, he had 8 of his 11 carries were on the final couple drives for Cincinnati. So the volume there a bit inflated. Who would you add between Fuller and Perine right now?
Yeah, I think it's easily Will Fuller. Fuller, like you said, he was in the 15 transactions column this week. The thing with Miami that I think a lot of people just like brush off Miami. They're like, oh, Tua sucks and they're not going to throw the ball a lot and all this. Number one, Tua has not been nearly as bad as people are saying and are going to lead you to believe. But number 2, Miami's actually been a really pass heavy team this year. I mean, they're first in the league in pass rate.
Because they can't run.
Because they can't run. They're top 5 in the league in neutral script pass rate. They're 6th in the league in pass attempts per game. So you have a lot of volume in that offense in general. And so, if Will Fuller steps in and even sees a 15% target share, which I think you can project him closer to like 18 or 19 if he's healthy and playing, then all of a sudden he's going to be probably a wide receiver 3 in fantasy, maybe a lower end to start, but we know that he can have spiked weeks as well. So I really like Will Fuller. He's still out there in like 80% of Yahoo leagues. So I would definitely be trying to add him this week.
Yeah, with the Dolphins pass catchers, I'd be very skeptical this week specifically, but beyond that, when that's their final match with the Bills. So like, I think they have 2 with the Jets still to come. They have 1 with the Patriots, which, it's fine. But like, they're done with the Bills after this week. Be wary this week, but after that, I think that they are totally fine. Let's talk to Joseph. Would you hold Dawson Knox if your tight end is Gesicki? Robert Tonyan available as a streamer for this week. Gesicki is playing this week, and I'd probably still use him over Tonyan personally, even though the matchup with the Bills is very scary. But would you hold on to Knox if you got Gesicki as your every week starter at tight end?
Yeah, again, I mean, like, it depends on what your situation is in your league. It's very hard to just say, like, yes, no, very confidently. But I'll say this. I think that Mike Gesicki, what he's doing right now is probably not as sustainable as he's been playing, as we get these pass catchers healthier in Miami. I do think his target share is going to drop a little bit. And that's really, he's been living off of that volume a little bit during the stretches. He's been a very clear top 5 tight end in fantasy. I would still keep Gesicki. I still want Gesicki. I would still prefer him over Dawson Knox. But Dawson Knox is seeing the right kind of usage in a really good offense, and he's a huge red zone threat for them. So, I don't think dropping Knox is the right idea either, because right now, those two guys, rest of season, I mean, once Knox gets back from a points per game perspective, I'd say you have 2 top 10 tight ends in fantasy with those two guys. So I don't think you can drop Knox in that scenario. If anything, I would try to trade him.
Yeah, you can try to trade him, but also, like, if you have to flex somebody, like, that's a situation where you could actually justify potentially, if you are in a bind, maybe flexing one of them there.
You could also, the other thing too is that if you you can get by the next few weeks, next week or two, let's say that Dawson Knox is out, because I don't think they put him on IR, so I don't think that the 3-week thing is necessarily happening, and then they just had their bye. So that's 1 week that's gone out of that like 3-week time frame that they had. So let's say that Knox is back in 2 weeks, in 2 games. If you know that you can get by those 2 games with some streaming tight ends like a Tonyan this week, who I know that we joked about it, but Tonyan should still see like a 20% target share in that game. Absolutely. I mean, he's going to see a decent amount of work in that game. If you can get a Tonyan this week and then someone else next week, I mean, maybe this is the time to sell Mike Gesicki and see if you can really cash in on how he's performing, as long as you're selling him for how he's performing, because he's one of those players where you're going to ask for something and someone's gonna be like, I don't want Mike Gesicki, without realizing how good he's actually been.
Right, for sure. Absolutely. So to DJ, how confident are you on Joe Burrow this week facing the Jets, JJ? They did hold the Patriots to 53 points this past week. So tough matchup with the Jets. Where are we at on Joe Burrow this week?
Yeah, look, the Jets are one of those teams where teams are just going to be able to get ahead on them. And, you have this fear that like they're not going to be able to, that quarterbacks aren't going to be able to perform against them, but I'm not going to really have that fear. I think, I mentioned Joe Burrow as like a sell hold this week in the 15 transaction show. And I said that because he has an 8% touchdown rate right now, which is unlikely going to continue. That doesn't mean that he's going to be bad rest of season. I still think he's a top 10 fantasy quarterback, but do keep that in mind where, the Bengals are skewing more towards the pass than the run with how they're scoring their touchdowns and all of that. But yeah, I'm not really worried about Burrow in pretty much any matchup, I would say. I mean, it's, he's just one of those quarterbacks where his weapons are good enough too that you don't really have to worry about that.
So sticking with the Bengals here, Tanantha is asking about Samaje Perine. Wasn't 15 transactions. It says 50-50 split here. I'd push back on that because before the final 3 drives, so Joe Mixon had that long touchdown. And at that point, it was 11 carries for Mixon compared to 3 for Samaje Perine. Perine had the long touchdown after that. Mixon got one more carry on the start of the next drive, and then Perine had the long touchdown. So I don't think it's as close to the split as it may have seemed based on the week 7 usage. But Samaje Perine is the clear 2 in that backfield, and he's at least getting some volume. So would you add Samaje Perine for this week if you're in need of a running back?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you want to add Perine, that's totally fine. They should see a nice positive game script this week. I would not be shocked at all. I mean, I haven't put the list together, but I wouldn't be shocked at all if Perine's on my sleeper show. Not him as a guest, but me talking about Perine on the sleeper show. That'd be interesting, having Samaje Perine come on to talk about himself. But yeah, I think Perine's a decent like sleeper flex type play this week in a really, what should be a positive game script. But like you said, Jim, I mean, this is not a situation where we look at the box score and we say, oh, look, this looks like a split backfield right now. It's not really the case when you look at the peripherals and how things actually went down. It's just that game script really got out of hand, and Cincinnati didn't have to throw, their Corvette running back onto the field and risk injury.
Right, exactly. Especially because he's banged up right now. And I think that factors into it too. Let's talk to John. Should I drop CJ Uzomah to stream Tyler Conklin or just stick with what I got? CJ Uzomah, the tight end 1 now, obviously. Would you use him against the Jets or would you go with Conklin there?
So Here's the thing with Uzomah, and I liked him last week because the matchup was there and he was running a lot of routes. I mean, he's basically been running as many routes as Tyler Boyd has been running in that offense. Not that Tyler Boyd has been this like overly productive wide receiver with Jamar Chase there, but just to show you that Uzomah is like the clear tight end one on that team. He's the fourth best option in terms of non-running backs in terms of pass catchers there. So he's not like a horrible play week in and week out, but at the same time, his target share is not that great. I mean, he's not seeing that much volume in that offense. He's been fortunate to find the end zone, and that's what we saw this past week. Tyler Conklin is actually kind of an interesting play this week, I think. He's seeing a 13% target share in that offense. Dallas, we already mentioned that game against Dallas should be high scoring. Dallas has been above average in terms of adjusted fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. So I think Conklin, straight up, if you just want to stream, and if you are streaming, I would probably prefer Conklin over Uzomah. I think you can make the argument to just prefer Conklin over Uzomah rest of season too, because, both of these offenses are actually operating. They're built similarly from the standpoint that, they have these stud wide receivers. The difference is that Cincinnati, number one, has not been as pass heavy as Minnesota has. And number two, Cincinnati has Tyler Boyd in the slot, whereas Minnesota doesn't really have that player. I mean, they use KJ Osborne, and they have used KJ Osborne a decent bit this year. He might see a 15% target share or so per game. But I think Conklin has more upside to just steal more work in that offense, and it is a more pass-heavy offense. So I would just, I think I just lean Conklin here and just ride him, until you see a better streamer on the waiver wire.
Yeah, Uzomah's been great. It's just hard to bank on him, like, torching Marlon Humphrey on a regular basis.
Yeah,
It was pretty sick, but like that's not. Is that sustainable? Probably not. I'd love it for it to be because he's fun, but probably not. Okay, you asked this one before. Kirk Cousins over Aaron Rodgers with his wide receivers. I'm assuming fantasy football stats guy tuned in later. Just confirming here, Cousins over Rodgers for this week. Let's talk to John. Is Kenneth Gainwell a must-add people with Sanders on their team? We don't know the status of Miles Sanders yet. So what's your thoughts on Kenneth Gainwell? Not just for the people who have Miles Sanders, but also just broadly Gainwell for right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you should be adding Kenneth Gainwell this week for sure. Gainwell is a very good running back. I liked him a lot as a prospect entering the league. Great pass catcher. I mean, I'm obsessed with Memphis running backs in general. I've just liked all of the ones that have come out. You get like Tony Pollard and Darrell Henderson and Antonio Gibson, and now you have Kenneth Gainwell. So I like Gainwell the prospect, and I think that he can handle a bigger workload than some people might believe, because basically the way they've used him so far this season is more of that scat back and that third down back. If you look at what they did this past week, though, Miles Sanders went out early, so we actually have a decent sample of like how they might utilize these two backs if Miles Sanders is out. By the way, Jordan Howard is probably going to get a little bit of run too, which is just not fun and a little bit frightening. But Boston Scott was the one who saw the goal line work. Boston Scott was the one who out attempted Kenneth Gainwell in that game. Gainwell, though, had like a 26% target share in that game. So, he's going to be used in that same role that we have seen him be utilized in. My thing here is that the Eagles and Gainwell benefits more, similar to like a DeAndre Swift. Gainwell is going to benefit a little bit more in these negative game scripts, which is not a typical thing for running backs, but we see this sometimes. Like Nyheim Hines, ironically, Nick Sirianni's old team and the way they used to utilize their running backs. Nyheim Hines is someone who the first 3 weeks of the season was being utilized a ton as a pass catcher, and now he's not. And you ask why? Well, it's because the Colts are actually winning and they're doing well, right? And so this is the same thing with Philadelphia. And then you look at their matchup this week, and that's when you're like, maybe this isn't as much of a Kenneth Gainwell week as it otherwise would be in a tougher matchup. And that's a little bit scary because this might end up being a 1 week injury for Miles Sanders. So, from that perspective, yes, you should add Kenneth Gainwell. And if you have Sanders, maybe bump him a little bit more in FOB. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of things working against Gainwell to not make him this like slam dunk ad. And I'm saying that as someone who really, really likes him as a talent.
Yeah, so looking at Gainwell's usage in that game, if you look from the time that Miles Sanders got hurt through the start of the fourth quarter, when they were down 30-7 out of that game effectively, Gainwell had 5 carries and 3 targets. Boston Scott had 3 carries and no targets. And that does include a time after Gainwell fumbled. He fumbled right at the end of the first half. If we look at just the third quarter, they didn't really have the ball. But in that time, Gainwell had 1 carry and 2 targets compared to 1 carry and no targets for Scott. So Scott's usage was pretty heavily in the garbage time. But I think when you combine the fact that Scott is there with the inevitability of Jordan Howard getting goal line work, that's enough to make it where we have to lower expectations for Gainwell. Still add him, but like keep expectations in check as a result of those compounding factors. Let's talk to Mark. What should I do with Jalen Waddle as Davante, Parker, and Will Fuller return? So it seems like Parker should have been back last week, was not, but should be back for this week. Tough matchup as well. Waddle's not getting downfield work, which makes him pretty volume dependent, and that volume may go down. So how are you shifting expectations for Jalen Waddle as the Dolphins get healthier?
Yeah, I mean, from an expectation standpoint, you got to shift them down. But at the same time, I go back to what I said earlier, where I think that if you were to talk to some random fantasy manager and say, what do you think of the Miami Dolphins passing attack? I think that the majority of people would respond and say, I don't think the Miami Dolphins passing attack is very good. And so, they don't realize that they've been a very pass-heavy offense. They don't realize that there is volume to be had. And so as a result of that, I don't think that Jalen Waddle is necessarily going to get the right market value if you were to try to trade him. So what should you do with him? You should probably just hold him and hope that he continues to see a 22% target share or so in that offense.
Yeah, I think that would be the right move because, again, Fuller's not back yet. So that's probably the way to play things here. Okay, EJ was offered to trade Chuba Hubbard for Miles Sanders and Tony Pollard, playing the guy this week. So he'd be helping his opponent this week because Christian McCaffrey's still out. But Chuba Hubbard's role has been kind of, I would say, weird is the word I would use for it. So what do you do here? Hubbard for for Sanders and Pollard.
This is tough. I think the way that I would play this, I mean, if I needed to win this week, I probably would not give up Chuba Hubbard. Because you can't count on Miles Sanders playing. Tony Pollard's more of a flex play, and he's disappeared at times this season, especially if Dallas ends up getting a pretty good positive game script. So I think if you need to win right now, you got to keep Hubbard. But if you're looking more long-term, I mean, look, last week, Miles Sanders was a buy for me on the 15 transaction show. I thought Miles Sanders was the best buy that you could possibly have found across fantasy football last week.
Great DFS play too.
Yeah. And then, he gets injured and, that's the way that football goes sometimes. But Sanders up until that point, up until that injury, the few games leading up to that, especially the last two before that, he was seeing amazing backfield share numbers. It was just that
5 carries in the first drive.
Right. They were playing in those games. They were playing Carolina and they were playing Tampa Bay, two really good defenses against running backs. I'm not shocked that number one, he wasn't able to run. I mean, he didn't even run that poorly against them, but I'm not surprised that number one, that he didn't get a ton of volume, but number two, especially against Tampa Bay, that Philadelphia didn't run the ball with him that much. Everyone's sitting on Twitter being like, why are they throwing so much against the Buccaneers? That's what everyone does against the Buccaneers. That's what you should do against the Buccaneers. So that's why Miles Sanders was a buy, because his backfield share numbers were so good. And they have one of the best rest of season schedules for running backs. So if you're thinking more long-term, and look, the Christian McCaffrey injury and what's going on there, this is assuming that he's going to be back after his IR stint is done, right? Like anything can happen there. I'm not trying to be a doctor here or anything and know that situation. But if you need more volatility, if you need to invite that variance onto your team, I think it's okay to do this deal and get Sanders and Pollard instead of Chuba. Obviously then Pollard has upside too if something were to happen to Zeke.
Right, absolutely. Let's talk to Philip here. A couple quarterback streamers, Jameis Winston, Teddy Bridgewater, Danny Dimes, Mac Jones, or Jared Goff. And he had clarified it's non-PPR. It's important because Daniel Jones, the number one pass catcher in New York right now, sick catch.
Yeah,
it was very nice. So non-PPR specifically, who you got from that quarterback group?
Even in non-PPR, I'm going to go with Danny Dimes here. Even in non-PPR. I don't mind Teddy Bridgewater this week, like I said earlier, but I think Danny Dimes is the play.
Just golden hands for Danny Dimes. Ryan's wondering, is it worth dropping Jalen Waddle for Rashad Bateman or Zach Moss? Rashad Bateman, I believe, is on a bye this week, but got decent usage once again before the blowout. Tyler Huntley threw like 13 times. He threw a bunch after he came in. That kind of skewed Bateman's target totals there, made it look a bit worse than it was. Zach Moss in a good offense, but frustrating usage. Would you drop Waddle for one of those guys?
Probably not, but I mean, it sounds like it's a fairly shallow league, but if it's not a shallow league, I would try my best to get both of these guys on my roster. And the reason I say that is, you already mentioned Bateman. He's seeing work in that offense. I think he's going to average like a 20% target share from here on out in that offense. Zach Moss, he didn't play well against Tennessee, but he still saw pretty good backfield share numbers. And Buffalo has an incredible schedule, especially over the next 3 weeks. I think Zach Moss could be an RB2 over the next 3 weeks. So I would try to at least add him on my roster.
Yeah, Zach Moss gets a lot of work in positive scripts, and they're 13.5-point favorites this week. So that should be good there. Let's talk to Tyler. Final question here. What's more likely? Khalil Herbert gets a feature back role or reverts to a 50-50 split with Damien Williams until Montgomery returns? And I think this is worth asking because I do like Khalil Herbert a lot. The thing that stuck out in my mind is Damien didn't practice all week because he wasn't activated until Saturday. I tend to lean because he's been so good as if Herbert will be getting featured back usage in the time being, but there is that lingering red flag in my head. So how are you viewing this one for Khalil Herbert looking in the immediate future?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're trying to be rational with the Bears, and it's really tough to be rational with the Bears. I mean, I think rational coaching says that Khalil Herbert should be on the field. I think that rational coaching says that Khalil Herbert should be on the field even when not as the workhorse, but getting work with David Montgomery back in that lineup. I mean, are the Bears even going to throw the ball once David Montgomery's back? They could just use both Herbert and Montgomery.
They might let Herbert throw it once or twice, as a trick play for a treat.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that there's a very good chance that we see Khalil Herbert in a not necessarily bell cow role, but I think that he's going to see a lot of work in that offense, maybe see 2/3 of the work in that offense, maybe even 3/4 of it, with a healthy and practicing Damien Williams. And then obviously once David Montgomery comes back, things change. But, I mentioned in my 15 transactions column this week, Jim, that I do think that when David Montgomery returns, Khalil Herbert is going to dig into his workflow because he's honestly been that good.
Disappointing as someone who has David Montgomery in Dynasty and best ball stuff. So hoping no, but it has been fun to watch Khalil Herbert. I think that in terms of his expectations for the week going forward, I would also assume that he winds up, because he played so well, getting a healthy amount of work. But in terms of start-sit decisions, if you're deciding him versus someone who's legit locked-in stud, keep that in mind, that there is a possibility Williams gets more work with a full week of practice under his belt. That is all that we have here for today on the Waiver Wire Q&A. But as mentioned, we have streams coming up for the next 3 days this week. Tom Vecchio, NBA DFS tomorrow. We have the Thursday football preview with Brandon Gadula on Thursday. And, of course, our snake draft, JJ won this past week. That'll be on Friday with costumes for Halloween because, of course, we'll be having that once again on Friday, all at 4 o'clock. Make sure you're subscribed here on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. JJ, I appreciate the time. Thank you as always, and good luck with your waiver runs in week 8.
Thanks, Jim.
Make sure you check out the Late Round Podcast and subscribe to it wherever you get your podcasts, and find JJ on Twitter at Late Round QB. I am at Jim Sannes. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you with your waivers. We'll talk to you once again later on this week. This has been the Waiver Wire Q&A.